construction loans made easy.
Tom, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Ed. It's just an absolute pleasure to have an opportunity to connect with you today.
Awesome. Well, we are chatting about something we haven't chatted about for Heirloom Homes. And we met recently on a project such as we're going to be chatting about here. And just really been intrigued just about the not only the project that we're working on, but really the whole idea of an heirloom home and really what that means. So I guess let's maybe we start with the basics, right? For people, how would you define an heirloom home?
Well, that's a great question. So Heirloom Homes is actually the title of our first monograph here at Wade Weissman Architecture. The big idea really is that we are trying to craft a home that is of a sufficient quality that it is worth passing along to future generations. Just like, you know, that grandfather clock that sat in your grandparents' house that is, you know, an irreplaceable item that is beloved by the entire family.
So when you're designing one of those homes, obviously it's drastically different than a home that maybe a client would be anticipating and living for 10 to 20 years.
Sure. Yeah.
When you think about an heirloom home, what are some of the resounding characteristics? Is it size? Is it quality? Is it all those things?
It's not necessarily size, although size certainly does play a part in it. I'd say that ultimately, you know, the kinds of homes and compounds that we design generally have a lifestyle component to them. These are destinations for families. These are family retreats, oftentimes. Sometimes on a larger piece of land, many times on a body of water. We saw a big spike of activity over the course of and immediately following the pandemic a number of years ago as a number of families felt potentially exposed, being in denser neighborhoods or urban settings. So these are places where there is a particular level of autonomy, there is a level of privacy. These are homes that frequently are intended to function not just for you know, the husband and wife who own the house, but also have the capacity to incorporate friends, children, own children with their children. So there are oftentimes bunk rooms or associated accessory dwelling units or guest houses that are on the property. But to answer another part of your question, the quality of the materials themselves, how the house is composed. These are not you know, developer driven, bottom dollar driven undertakings. These are an investment in future generations' ability to use and enjoy the property.
For the most part, is it somebody's primary residence, and then with functionality to have, like as you said, friends and family stay a while? I guess depending on who they are, they may stay longer than others.
I would say that I'd say maybe a third of the projects that we're working on are intended to be full-time residences. Oftentimes they're weekend houses, they're places that people go for spring break, and there's usually a time horizon associated with that where, you know, when the couple is ultimately, you know, looking at retirement, there is frequently a transition from what started out as, you know, a weekend home becomes ultimately a full-time residence.
Gotcha. So as you mentioned, the urban dwelling, perhaps. It may be a profile might be somebody who's currently living in a city center that still actively working, but kind of seeing the end of the road on their work life. So they're building this now to prepare for when they're able to retire full time.
When the grandkids come rolling in.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, for
Yep.
sure. In terms of how you design it, I guess maybe start with some of those initial conversations you're having with clients. Um, uh, I would
Well,
imagine it's probably,
one of the big
and you do both the heirloom homes as well as traditional homes for people that are, building a home for their primary residence.
Absolutely.
What's the difference in some of the initial conversations and how the client may approach that, and maybe how you may approach that as well?
I think the biggest question is, we ask why the owner is looking at, taking on this particular endeavor, because it's relatively easy to go out onto the marketplace and buy a pre-existing home, right? It oftentimes is much more cost effective to do so. But usually what you find when you start digging into it a little bit is it all comes back to their family, and creating a place for the family to to converge at the holidays. It's also a great way to take some capital out of the market potentially and put it into a more durable asset. So there are a lot of reasons why people choose to design a custom home. And I'd say that in the best case scenario, the houses that we design for our clients ultimately become almost like a work of portraiture for the client. They say something about who that individual is in the world, um, that is completely unique to them.
Right. And then as you approach the designs as well, I guess what sort, given the assumption that it would be a home that's going to stand for generations, how do design conversations initially go? Does the client have a design style? Are you looking at the location? A location and
Okay, so yeah, this is
be
a
different.
nuts and bolts sort of question. Okay, so we do actually we have over the years refined a questionnaire for our clients that we always ask them to fill out. It does ask a number of lifestyle questions: number of bedrooms, whether the bedrooms have ensuite bathrooms, Jack and Jill bathrooms, if they need uh, a library space or a place to work from home, which is a big trend within our industry right now, whether they need you know a significant food pantry, or what we frequently put into our drawings, or the houses we design a scullery space that's adjacent to the kitchen, um, that serves almost as a dirty kitchen. So it's a whole host of lifestyle questions, where we try and understand what the specific program and requirements for the house and how it functions needs to be. And we use that questionnaire and the responses to the questionnaire as kind of a checklist when we're going through our design process. Oftentimes, owners have spent, months, if not years, contemplating an undertaking like this, and have, been accruing a lot of precedent images of homes that they've seen online, whether it's Instagram or Pinterest or Houzz. And we always want to ask for as much of that supplemental information to give us an understanding of the look and the feel, the level of formality, the kinds of details that they're interested in accomplishing with the home. Um, And sometimes even aspects of the images that they share with us can also illustrate the things that they don't like or want to see. And so there is kind of an extensive inquiry that we go through as we're evaluating, the precedent imagery that they supply, but also just the textual information that describes how the house is supposed to function and kind of what the metrics of it are. Like I said, the square footage, the number of bedrooms, whether there's bunk rooms, whether there's media rooms, exercise rooms, resistance pools, that sort of thing.
Of course, the exterior style, home styles come and go. They're always
Sure,
there, I guess, but some become popular for moments. Um,
sure.
do you?
The modern farmhouse, for
That's
instance,
right.
was
That's
hot
right.
for a
So,
minute. Yeah.
do you? Are there some scenarios where a client comes to you to want this generational home with a style that maybe not be timeless, that you have those conversations about thinking about maybe changing the exterior style to be something that may be more timeless?
Well, that's a great question, but at the end of the day, it's their home, it's not our home. There are a number of architects in the industry that have kind of an identifiable style. We do not have an identifiable style. If you actually look at our website, um, every home is different, everyone is unique. And we actually pride ourselves in ultimately a level of anonymity or a lack of ability to look at one of our homes and know exactly who the architect was. We actually want the houses to be a little bit more anonymous, and expressive of who our client is. So
Absolutely.
that's not to say that they may share an image of something that we're not necessarily thrilled with, but well, ultimately, it's our job to serve them, to provide them with not just what they're asking for, but really what they want under the surface. And so, of course, we develop the design in such a way that we can, look at different stylistic expressions on the exterior elevations that fit with the plan of the house. And so, if we have the ability to lead them to another outcome, and it turns out that it is so much more than they ever expected it to be, we're thrilled.
Absolutely. So now we've got essentially the design conversation had, and then it gets to materials, right? And anybody who's built a home can tell you they could build a home for X dollars per square foot and 10x dollars per square foot, depending
Sure.
on what they're going to put into the home. And that's all boils down to the material. So the
Materials and
conversation
details.
regarding materials, how does that go? What are some of the things that you recommend, or some of the differences between maybe a generational heirloom home versus just a traditional home that if this is going to stand for 100, maybe 100 years or longer, most likely, what are the materials that you really concentrate on?
Well, there's a seemingly endless number of options for sure. You can never go wrong with brick or stone exteriors, right? You can never go wrong with a copper roof or a slate roof. These are certainly fundamental components to successfully executing a house that's going to withstand the test of time. That's not to say that there aren't some man-made or synthetic materials that can perform equally as well. Oftentimes, because these are not full-time residences, um, trying to minimize long-term maintenance is important, and there are certainly options for synthetic products for like a wood or shingle siding that, for instance, can ultimately minimize um, the amount of maintenance, especially when you're looking at sites, say, like here in Milwaukee, where we have Lake Michigan, a huge body of water. You know, we may be designing a house right on the bluff on Lake Michigan, and that is a, you know, very extreme environment. Um, and so we'll be particularly attentive to what the exterior siding materials and roofing materials are to make sure that ultimately it stays air and water tight. So for the most part, we prefer natural materials, natural cedar, shingles, brick exteriors, stone exteriors. Generally speaking, the windows that we specify are have a clad aluminum exterior surface for that purpose. But every once in a while, we're fortunate enough to have a client who's interested in investing in, you know, a really beautiful solid mahogany window. That's, you know,
Statement.
it's important to understand that there's going to be some maintenance associated with that. But it's, you know, an incredibly beautiful product, both from the interior and from the exterior. Uh, I'm not sure what more to say about that, but
Yeah,
it's,
no, no, no. And of course, as you're building these for generations, do you have to, when you're designing the home, a client may be in, you know, one season of their life, if you will, but it's going to be used for really all seasons of people's lives.
Mhm.
So, is that something you keep in mind and say, well, you know, you don't need this space for this now, but at some point there's going to be a need for it?
Well, sure. I mean, one example might be um, we find frequently that we will plan for uh, a future primary bedroom suite on the main living level, while the owners of the home may prefer to be on the second level because it affords better views of, you know, the lake or the woods of their property,
Right.
but that they want to hedge uh, for some mobility or accessibility issues and have that secondary primary suite that's utilized, you know, in the short term as guest room on the main level. Short of that, we will frequently design elevators for our homes. They may not be installed immediately. They may look kind of like a closet when
Right.
you open the door, but that we've prepared the structural opening within the floor structure to essentially be removed at a future point in time in order to have an elevator installed so that they can easily get between floors without worrying about going up and down the staircase a million times a day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Let's talk about costs a little bit. Although it seems
Nobody ever wants to talk about costs.
you leave that for the end, right? Just let me know what it costs. Um, it certainly seems that construction costs is leveling out on a relative basis here over the past year, but up quite a bit since 2019.
Absolutely.
What sort of concessions, I guess, do I maybe ask the question: are clients making concessions on costs on some things, or you know, I would imagine this clientele goes into building a home like this, understanding that you know, they want what they want, and it's gonna cost what it's gonna cost.
Sure. I'd say we have both kinds of clients. So there are some clients who um, are exactly as you described. They want what they want. They, you know, have one shot at getting this right, and they're going to spare no expense. But that's not every client that we serve. We have, you know, I guess to back up a little bit, we don't really have a minimum threshold for a construction cost or a minimum size of house. When we're looking at taking on a project, we simply want to make sure that the client wants to do something interesting, and that whatever that interesting thing is, that it's appropriately budgeted. So, the cost per square foot is always an issue. Ultimately, every client has a budget. Some budgets are bigger than others. And we tried our best to work within the constraints of the budget that's put forward. And so, of course, it does impact the style of the house, the level of intricacy of the detail on the interiors and the exteriors, how complex the massing or the roof framing for the house is also a consideration when trying to drive a design towards a specific budget.
Right. And you mentioned interesting projects. We all want to be have fun at our job. We all want to enjoy our job and be challenged. I would imagine as an architect, you can get boring at times just drawing boxes. Interesting projects, I would imagine, are something like you said is fun to work with. What sort of maybe something recent, or what sort of things make it an interesting project for Tom Wynn?
Oh my goodness. Well, honestly, like as I said, no two of our projects are ever the same. I suppose that when you're looking at a drawing set and squint a little bit, some of the drawings may look similar. I mean, every house has a foundation which has a footing, and there's a floor framing system that sits on top of that, and 2x6 stud walls built on top of that, and then somewhere along the way there's another floor or roof structure. And so all of the components by and large are pretty predictable, but there's almost an infinite number of ways that that those pieces can come together successfully. In terms of like interesting projects that we've got going on right now, I think one of the ones that's most exciting for us is we're working on sort of a French Beaux-Arts beach house that is on the Gulf in Siesta Key, and that's really super exciting. On the other end of the spectrum, we've got a lodge under construction on a lake up in the North Woods here in Wisconsin, that is really going to be a sensational project. And we've got a really fun sort of compound under construction out in technically in Montecito, California. And so these are homes in very different climatic conditions with very different stylistic expressions, very different materials used both on the interior and the exterior. Some of them are more sculptural in nature. So there's just a tremendous deal of variety that we're kind of playing with in the studio right now. So we have really no end of interesting things to work on, which is great.
And I imagine since you do work nationally, that has to keep it fresh as well, right? Because there's different environmental impacts to different.
Absolutely.
Building in the North Woods of Wisconsin is a heck of a lot different than on the Gulf of
Mexico. I like to call it the Gulf of the Americas.
That's right.
It's a little more inclusive. Just working on the Gulf has been a real interesting learning curve for us. Obviously, with hurricane concerns, the need to basically be able to plan for, the hurricane force winds, storms, surge of water across the property. It requires us to build the house basically with the main floor about 18 feet above sea level, where the lower level walls are designed in order to wash away, but the house will still remain in its in its place. So yes, it is a very different construction type than building in the Northwoods, or even out in California, where you've got some seismic issues and other natural events to basically be able to plan for, whether that's um, the flame resistance of the exterior cladding materials or what have you.
I would imagine, most of these homes are going to be lean on the side of, higher quality materials for sure. I would imagine that that would ultimately long term mean that most of these homes are going to be pretty low on maintenance costs. Like you said, a slate roof. Um, uh,
Should last 100 years or
yeah,
more.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I would imagine uh, ultimately that pays off ultimately for the homeowner as well.
Yeah, um, I guess I have a little saying, you never save money being cheap. It's really difficult. All homes have maintenance requirements over time, right? And choosing the right finishes and materials and details ultimately can go a long ways to minimize the amount of maintenance required. Um, and utilizing less expensive materials up front will frequently mean either repurchase or replacement in the future, like within the lifespan of the original homeowner. So it's kind of like, you could buy the, you know, $79 bookcase from IKEA, or you could have a carpenter build a bookcase for you that might cost two or three times as much, but it will be the only bookcase that you'll need to purchase. Whereas the IKEA bookcase you will buy, five or six
And
times.
have to put
Yeah.
it together.
And have to put it together for sure. Yeah.
And that's the worst part.
Yeah. No, you've basically got one shot to do it right. And we would much rather design a smaller home that is higher in quality than a larger home that is lower in quality for that reason.
Yeah, for sure. And as I
Yeah,
think
we are.
about these homes being generational, how often are kids involved with some of the design plans as well? If this is really set out to be generational, or do you tend to have the primary client, the one making all the decisions?
Oh my goodness. That's a good question. Kids and family at large are often involved. Sometimes there's mother-in-law suite, or uh, we're working on a house on an inland lake here, um, for a gentleman who is taking over a family property, and there is a portion of the second floor that is being reserved as kind of an apartment for his mother to live in part-time when she's visiting, and that at some point in the future, that is going to be deconverted and turned into more, ordinary living space for his family. But there is a lot of feedback that we're getting from his mother that is informing how the design for the house is ultimately unfolding. So it's not just kids who might want, mm, a secret door behind a bookcase into, a finished playroom in the attic adjacent to their bedroom. That certainly happens, but sometimes it's also designing for an aging parent and making accommodations for them to be able to comfortably live with you and still have some autonomy and separation from everything else that's going on within that household.
Absolutely. And as you're going through the design process, uh, do clients tend to focus on maybe one particular aspect of the home? Is there maybe some sort of emotional connection that they may have to certain parts of the home, and or maybe not, maybe it's emotional, but maybe it's something that is truly the one thing they want to focus on, uh, the only thing that they're really on their wish list.
Well, I would say that all of our clients want to have fun in the process. They want to enjoy the process. They don't want to be rushed through, making a whole bunch of decisions that they're going to regret later. So it is a very deliberate process, and it is also an iterative process. So the designs of these homes aren't, well, every once in a while we hit it out of the park, and the first sketch that you put in front of them is ultimately the house that's built.
Right.
Most often that's not the case. And so I would say there are often features within a house that homeowners can obsess over, but more often than not, it is the house as a whole that they're emotionally reacting to. So there might be, a cozy little window seat and a staircase that they just absolutely love. But I'd say more often than not, it's the house as a whole and how it sits on the property that I think people tend to fixate on.
For some of the heirloom homes that you design, how about the outdoor space? Let's talk a little bit about that briefly.
Hmm.
Are those
What a
How do those differ compared to
Yeah.
maybe a traditional home?
Well, that's a great question. So the outdoor spaces or the development of the landscape surrounding the house is every bit as important as the house itself. When we first put pencil to paper, so to speak, we don't actually design anything until we've actually been to the property and looked at what the views are in particular directions, whether there is an adjacent home or um, a light pole or whatever it is that you want to crop out of view, so that we can make sure that all of the primary spaces have, the best views from inside of the house. But when there is something that we want to crop out of view, like we don't want to see the garage doors of, the property next door, and we have the ability to design a wing of the house to extend out in such a way that, it uh, precludes the ability to see that thing. It also allows us to start to form little courtyard spaces outside, right? To define exterior rooms within the context of the house at large. And so we frequently work with really phenomenal landscape architects that understand the need to, define those spaces within the landscape and extend to that living space outdoors in a meaningful way.
And I would imagine, especially homes that are on water, whether that's a
Mhm.
gulf, an ocean, or a lake,
Mhm.
um, that really puts emphasis. Not, most people build a home focus on the curb appeal, right? What that front of the house
Mhm.
looks like. You really, in many cases, I would imagine on waterfront homes, you're concentrating equally, if not more, on the back of the home, I would imagine, which
Well,
water, right?
yeah, well, so that's the funny thing about designing homes on water or, on an inland lake. Um, Everybody refers to the back of the house as the front of the house. That's
Right.
really where, yeah, that's really where it's at. So,
Oh, right.
um, the street side is usually the rear of the house, just conceptually speaking. So, and that is part and parcel with the lifestyle of the house itself, right? You don't want to have, a bunch of air conditioning units on the back of the house that you can see from the lake that is, creating a lot of noise while you're trying to entertain. Those things you generally find their way to the sides or to the front of the house, frequently. So yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so I'm a film buff. I tend to lean a lot of
Okay.
the classic films.
Okay.
So when you watch movies, are you always analyzing some of these homes that you think about maybe the Home Alone house or something like that? I'm partial to the homes of the black and white films, whether it be
Okay.
Casablanca or
Sure.
some of the Orson Welles films have some classic.
Sure.
Do you have any favorite film homes that you love, whether they're even real or just a movie set?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Do I have to restrict my answer to films or can I bring in TV shows too?
TV shows too, sure, certainly.
Okay, so I've got a few.
Brady Bunch? Are you are you
Um,
are you leaning Brady Bunch? Is that what you're gonna do?
no, no, not, yeah, actually the Brady Bunch, I mean, that's a great house too, but no, there's actually a film out, or a TV show out right now. I think it might be on Netflix. It's called The Watcher, and it's this incredibly beautiful, I'd say, Victorian house in New England. And the house definitely figures prominently as a character within the course of the series, which is only 7 or 8 episodes long. It's a little bit creepy, but the house is amazing. Um, Thinking about houses in films, there was a movie, probably, it's got to be at least 10 or more years ago, that was directed by Tom Ford, the designer, the fashion designer. He did a couple movies. It was called A Single Man with Colin Firth. And then that was a really incredibly beautiful sort of mid-century modern house that was designed by an architect in California called John Lautner, I think. And if you haven't seen that movie, I'd highly recommend it just for the sets with the house in it. Although,
Do you ever
it
have any
is.
ever
What's
have any
that?
clients come to you with inspiration from TV shows or movies? I would hope not.
Yeah, I don't think so. Although there was a period of time, maybe 20 years or so ago, that movie that Diane Keaton was in, Something's Got to Give, I think.
Yes.
That Something's Got to Give house. That was huge. And there were definitely clients who were inspired by that house and looking to replicate some aspect of it. I'd say that was huge.
Jack Nicholson as well, I believe, right?
I believe so. Yes. Yep. Yep.
Well, awesome. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you for taking the time here, Tom. I guess any clients been thinking about building an heirloom home. I guess what are some of those first steps they should take? What are some of the recommendations you might have for them as they're considering it?
I would say first things first. Be patient. It does take some time in planning. Understand that, as I said earlier, it is an iterative process. We don't anticipate getting it right off the bat. Um, just to talk a little bit about our process, as we're crafting the vision for the house, we do set aside a series of recurring meetings where we present, the ideas, the design vision for the house. They take the drawings back home with them. They discuss it with their family. They give us feedback. We roll their feedback back into our documents. And, that probably takes 3, 4, sometimes 5 iterations before we get, all of their ideas and our compositional notions sort of rolled into the drawing set. Oftentimes I'd say clients have an expectation that, we're going to start the design process and then we're going to be under construction in, 3 months or 5 months. And while that's not necessarily impossible to do, it's frequently closer to a year from, starting the first drawing and getting a shovel in the ground. There's just a tremendous amount of information and, thousands and thousands of decisions along the way that feed into the design process, in order to make sure that everybody is making decisions in the most informed way possible, whether it's making sure that all of the design opportunities are fully explored, or whether it's maybe going out to the market a couple times and test fitting the construction costs to make sure that the scope of the project falls within the budget. So, I'd say the biggest thing is just understand that it's a process. And at the end of the day, it's just about the most fun that you're ever going to have. And actually taking the time to dream a little bit about what this home means to you and to your family. And that's the thing I think that we all thrive on the most in our office.
And I would imagine, just my gut tells me, clients looking to build a home like this, timing would probably be 2 to 3 times the amount as somebody who wants to build a home, a traditional home.
Are you talking about the time in construction?
Time on the design time, and you mentioned earlier that about 2/3 of the homes are generally not primary residences, so that's got to give you some extra time there. People have a home to live in, so this is something that they're going to be building for the future, if you will. So that must give you, there's not that rush for somebody, like you said, to give me decisions quickly and let's get in the house. Or are they just so excited to get it done, they want to start as quickly as possible?
As I said, every client has a budget, and some are bigger than others. They can afford, these clients can afford to spend some, almost whatever they want on a house. But the one thing they can't buy is time. And so, as you can imagine, a lot of our clients are getting up there in the years just a little bit, right? Every once in a while, we're fortunate to be working with a younger family, that has a long time horizon for, the design process to play out. And some clients, they know that they've got 10, 15 good years left and they want to get into that house and they want to enjoy it as soon as possible. And those are the clients who, will bend over backwards if we can to, get that shovel in the ground in 5 months instead of a year. But it does mean to some extent that there are going to be some decisions that have to be made, and then we have to contend with them over the course of construction. Sometimes the design process actually has to take place while the home is under construction. We don't always, with those clients, have the ability to cross every T and dot every I and design thoughtfully through every space. We have to allow that to unfold a little bit more organically in order to accelerate the design process, because again, time is the one thing that you can't buy, and those clients have a sense of urgency that needs to be satisfied.
As I hear you explain that process as the construction loan guy, if the client were to take a construction loan, that means prices may change during the construction phase as well.
It sure does. It requires a particular level of risk tolerance.
Yeah. So as long as they understand that, right? As long as they understand there may be some changes, And you get their acknowledgement of that. That's got to be,
You know,
not ideal, but perfectly fine for you, I'd imagine.
that's actually a really good observation. Yeah, there will be changes. There are always changes over the course of the design process. Yes, there's a certain amount of risk tolerance that is required in order to work through a design while the house is under construction, because obviously sometimes that means you're in a two steps forward, one step back situation. Um, but on the flip side, with the rate of inflation that we've seen within the marketplace over the course of the last, 5 or 7 years, sometimes getting under construction sooner than later actually works in your favor, because, if you can basically move the clock forward by 6 or 7 months, that's 6 or 7 months of commodity costs rising that you've pulled forward. So uh, it's definitely a balancing act, and there is some risk involved in it, but it's not always. I'd say not making up, not making all of those decisions in the design phase up front doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be plagued by excessive change orders in the future, right? So there's there are always trade-offs that are available. I think one of my favorite quotes is, "There are no solutions, only trade-offs."
I love that. And we'll
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Oh, all right
Um,
then.
Thank you again for taking the time. We'll have your contact information, the links below if people want to
Okay.
reach out to you. Really do some amazing work. Uh, really excited to have met you with this project that we have a mutual client in. So I'm looking forward to seeing that all come together. And thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you for having me on, and for the good work that you do in helping make our mutual clients' dreams a reality. It's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed getting to learn a little bit more about you and your side of the industry.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Tom. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Take care, Ed.